Hi, I'm Chung Ching Kwong. I'm the Hong Kong campaigns coordinator of the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China. And I'm also myself born and raised in Hong Kong and now living in exile. And working, I'm going to share my work at IPAC. Oh, wow, the theme changed. So working on Hong Kong and IPAC is a one-of-a-kind experience because the Inter-Parliamentary Alliance on China is a network of over 250 politicians from 30 legislatures working on China-related policy, and we're still rapidly growing. And the very interesting part about the organization is that it's not an NGO as we know it. It's a one-of-a-kind existence. It's a parliamentarian-led institution, not like UN 2.0 in a way, but it's governed by parliamentarians themselves and by consensus. The legislators decide on the agenda, and we, my colleagues at the Secretariat, work to serve that agenda. It's authentically cross-party, and there are a broad range of views on how to approach the China and Hong Kong question within IPAC, and a very broad range of political party represented, from the German Greens to the US Republicans to all major parties in Japan and to the Czech Pirate Party. We recently hosted our conference in DC in September with 60 legislators participating, which we lay out our communique, which outlines our plan for the future. And so the greatest asset of IPAC and the way that we operate is that we rely on the trust among members on each other. But the job working on Hong Kong in general and China issues, as many of you know, it's extremely difficult. And Hong Kong is especially a very challenging topic. Like within and beyond the political context, Hong Kong is a challenging topic for various reasons. Every time when we try to explain certain Hong Kong issues of what's happening in Hong Kong right now, we often have to start with, once upon a time, there is this city being handed over to China in 1997 without Hong Kongers' participation, and we are being removed from a UN self-determination list and the joint declaration, etc., etc., etc. There's just so much context that you have to explain every time when you try to make sense of what's happening in Hong Kong and translate it into simple human languages. Anyone in this room who has attempted to prepare a briefing on Hong Kong will have encountered a situation where you have written pages of context before getting into the subject itself. And another difficulty is diminishing political will. The perception of Hong Kong as a lost cause right now is one of the issues here. But another key issue here is that Hong Kong is less of a geopolitical concern than it once was because of what happened in recent years. Those countries which sought to defend Hong Kong's interests or democracy movement often did so in pursuit of their own national interests, like going after Hong Kong's status as a financial hub in that case. And things have clearly moved on, and it's worth pointing out here that as so often as Southeast Asian politics, our agency isn't a primary concern for many of the countries. In my work with IPAC, we are keen to do this differently. And the politicians we work with want to do everything they can to amplify Hong Kongers' voices. So as you can see, we have, Hong Kongers have something that we want to do. And before the DC conference that I mentioned that happened in September in Washington, DC, we had a brief consultation with Hong Kong groups, and we tried to identify scope of their needs to help us laying out what we will focus on next year. As you can see, it's such a long list, and each of these items require different effort. Most of them can be achieved by securing policy changes, but there is still a long way to go, as many of you know. And Hong Kongers are fighting quite hard themselves as well. So the situation in Hong Kong right now, it's quite complicated. There is still local movement going on, but it's hardly visible outside of the courtroom. So there have been political cases that is ongoing, but because of the technicalities of legal procedures and the very unfriendly languages that lawyers and judges or prosecution tend to use, it's very difficult to follow what's happened. And at the same time, there is the diaspora movement that's happening. And it's very interesting to see that the focus of the diaspora group has shifted. From 2019, we the so-called international front aimed to serve the movement that's happening locally. So we are there in foreign parliaments in different places trying to amplify what's happening in Hong Kong. But right now we have moved to develop our own focuses. So the focus of the diaspora movement includes policy advocacy, community building, cultural preservation, and providing assistance to asylum seekers. So these are just the main categories of what we are, the diaspora community is working on, but it doesn't cover everything that we're doing. So what is, the whole list just kind of disappeared with the words, but IPAC is working on lots of things right now when it comes to Hong Kong. So I'm just going to read aloud because it disappeared on the screen. So IPAC is calling for targeted sanctions and asset audit, improving export control, banning the import of products related to human rights abuse in Hong Kong and China, opening lifeboat schemes for Hong Kongers, recalling overseas judges, suspending extradition treaties, addressing transnational repression, seeking legal redress for international law violations. So before I joined IPAC, IPAC has already launched a no extradition campaign among our members, where they're trying to stop extradition agreements between China with foreign governments and Hong Kong with foreign governments. And we have launched our legal accountability campaign this year in June, trying to work on targeted sanctions, export control, and so on. And all of these things requires a lot of effort and trying to push governments to actually take action. So when it comes to strategy of doing these things, it's clear that there have been a lot of movement on China policy in the last 2 years, and there are a number of factors that led to it. Chief amongst them is the behavior that the Chinese Communist Party, which has repeatedly shot itself in the foot, I can't say properly, shot itself in the foot on the international stage. But the parliamentary campaign has also been quite influential. So there is no question that the number of parliamentary debates on China has massively increased, and that has shifted perceptions, raised awareness, and reframed the China debate. IPAC and others, who is like everyone in the room, have played a part in this. And parliamentary campaigning is an imperfect tool for an issue as complex as China. The subtleties and nuances of the China question do not lend themselves to parliamentary trench warfare. But without parliamentary trench warfare, we will not have moved the debate on around China. Regrettably, our experience suggests that governments are very reluctant to reform their own China policy without heavy pressure, as we have seen or we heard from previous speakers working on Hong Kong. Put bluntly, governments are not going to do things unless they're being forced to. And this is, it's true, they sometimes are pushed by the circumstances, but the last 2 years have shown clearly that they have to be kind of forced through parliamentary leverage to actually achieve policy changes. So IPAC, as a framing institution, is invaluable, but framing alone is not enough. Our common goal must be to enable politicians to go deeper so that there is a picture to put into the frame which is worthy of the scale of the challenge. So I'm going to end with this catchphrase that a lot of our UK members started using recently. The phrase, every bill's a China bill, is not to be understood in a way that so-called less best China and every opportunity we got. What it means is an acknowledgement that only consistency and sustained pressure will bring about the movement that we need and the changes we want to see when it comes to Hong Kong. So this is all I've got to share with you, and I look forward to hearing your comments and answering your questions if you have any. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Glacier, for the really informative talk. And I just have a question that there is like a lesson I kind of learned from the previous session presented by Ray and Anouk. And is that I think for a lot of like legislative actions, like it need to go like a lot of action points need to go parallelly. For example, closing up the Economic and Trade Office plus lifeboat probably bill, so that you can kind of like contain that, like a good like saving nets for Hong Kongers seeking support. So I'm just wondering what. Like I know like IPAC have a lot of different mandates and important work that has been doing, and just wondering if you guys have a few like top priority that has been working at right now. And also following up on that, do you guys, I know you guys have like members all around the world, and is there any like regional priorities in different regions, for example in Asia or in Africa or in Europe?
Yeah, so for the first question, as I mentioned, we have a conference in DC in September, so we actually came out with a communique, and there is a section dedicated to Hong Kong. And in terms of Hong Kong, we are focusing on legal accountability, basically targeted Magnitsky-style sanctions and scrutinizing limiting export control of dual-use goods. And so we are calling for redressing violations of international law through parliamentary actions, like pushing the government through asking questions, raising debates, or amending bills and so on. So these are the work that our members and our co-chairs have been doing. And I think the very interesting part is, like Ray and Anouk have mentioned, it's not like one bill that's going to solve every problem, but the fact that we're living in a world that one bill only deals with one thing, like it's a reality that we all live in. So it's almost like a fragmented solution being pieced together, so that we have more comprehensive solution to the China problem as we see it right now, a threat to democracy and so on. So I'd say there is still a lot to do, and it's not just up to a group of politicians or any individual in the room to do it. It's a collective effort. Like we won't be able to do anything that we do if we're not informed by researchers, by think tanks about what's happening in the world and what exactly is happening. For example, recently, Safeguard Defenders came out with a report about overseas Chinese police station. We have been talking about transnational repression for a long time, but we don't have concrete evidence to present to governments and said, can you deal with this right now, please? And after that report has come out, we have seen a lot of parliamentarians taking actions and say, this has to be investigated. We have to do certain things about it. And so I think there is, it's a fragmented solution being pieced together to form a more comprehensive solution. And IPAC has a lot of different focuses when it comes to China. So you can go to our website and look at our communique, because I can't remember it from the back of my mind. I'm sorry about that. And another thing about the regional thing, we have different people working on regional affairs, and we have like forums, and we had just organized a conference in DC trying to put everyone together in one room and kind of push them to come up with things that they want to do and set an agenda, what we're going to work on. And we have now over 30 legislatures, and we do have a lot of members from different continents, but it's still imbalanced in a way, because in some regions there are not a lot of democracy countries because of how geopolitics work. But we're expanding very rapidly, and we are seeking out members all over the world, trying to make IPAC a stronger and bigger network.
Hi there. Yep, thank you for your presentation. So I'm curious about when IPAC is reaching out to new politicians, new legislative bodies, what kind of messages you try to use. And actually, more importantly, I'm wondering if you have an idea or an impression about what kinds of politicians around the world, what kinds of elected officials are interested in China.
I'd say when IPAC expand or widen its membership, we have an approach where we have to have one co-chair from the ruling party and one co-chair from the opposition party. And they have to be, like, it's the co-chairs who are making a decision when it comes to these things. So they are the ones who are driving the agenda, coming up with a consensus, and the secretariat, which is my colleagues and I, will try to work on to serve that agenda. So when it comes to membership, it's completely up to the co-chairs themselves to decide on what do they want. And when new members join or new places join IPAC, we usually kind of welcome them in a warm manner, hoping that they won't be scared about the work that we do in a way. And for the question of who is interested, I think there is a perception of people who are interested in the China question has to be hawkish, extreme right-wing kind of figure, but it's not. As I said, we have a very wide membership, from the German Greens to US Republicans to major parties in Japan and even Pirate Party in the Czech. So because of how we are formed, like, we have to have one co-chair from the ruling party and one co-chair from the opposition, making it balanced, and there is a wide range of voices. There are very moderate voices on China, and they're the more, like, I don't think radical is the right word, but they're more like, I don't have a right word to use it, but you get the general meaning, that there are different voices on what should be done, and we always try to reach a consensus. Basically, we make our decision, the co-chairs make the decisions by consensus, so there's always discussions on what things should be done, and everything we do, every statement we issue to every action that we take are agreed by all co-chairs. It's not like there is one person who's dominating the whole thing. It doesn't happen that way in the IPAC.
Hi, thanks for your comments. I'm Claire from the the U.S. mission to the EU in Brussels. Can you talk a little bit about your engagement with existing inter-parliamentary affairs groups? There's the NATO Inter-Parliamentary Affairs Group, there's the ASEAN one, there's the European Parliament writ large, and just opportunities there, or existing engagements with the pre-existing inter-parliamentary groups. Thanks.
I think there is a lot of overlap between members of IPAC and members of these committees and different kinds of groups that are focusing on different issues. Like, I work mainly on Hong Kong, so there are Hong Kong focus group in different parliaments focusing on Hong Kong, and most of the time those are members of IPAC or potential members of IPAC, just to put it that way. And we often make use of these kind of opportunities to work with parliamentarians outside of the membership. For example, when the co-chairs decided that we're going to do a statement on certain issues in a specific parliament, they will reach out to their colleagues, and even though they're not IPAC members, to see if they're interested. But there is no, like, systematic way on what to do it. I think it's very interesting to see that most of these collaborations have to happen organically for it to sustain in a way you can't really manually say, oh, this is step A, B, C, and then we do it. It's usually about the trust. As I said, IPAC's great asset is trust parliamentarians have in each other and the relationship that they build to work together in such a way. That is not a very substantial answer to the question, but I hope that's satisfying.
Hi, Glacier. Thanks for your talk. So actually, what I'm curious about, sorry, I'm Ian, a partner of DTL. What I'm curious about is, in your parliamentary work, systematically, what kinds of obstacles, challenges do you come across most commonly, and how do you overcome them?
I think one of the greatest challenge is in my personal experience as the Hong Kong campaign coordinator, is to pick your own battle, because there is so much that's happening on a daily basis on the Hong Kong brief and the China brief. Like, what are the things that warrants immediate action, and what kind of action has to be taken, or what is the important information that we have to take into consideration? I think it's always the greatest challenge. And another, from an IPAC perspective, I think is to put everyone together in the same room and make sure that they trust each other, and then they're building relationship organically. As I said, this cannot be manually controlled. It's not like group projects at school that you can just assign people sitting together. We're talking about hundreds of politicians who all work in their own field and all have their own expertise. So I think from an IPAC perspective, building and maintaining the trust has been our greatest asset, and also one of the hardest thing to do, because it's an existence or an institution that we have never seen. So I think that's what we are working on so far.
Thank you.
So since we have the time, I don't have that much of a background with IPAC, but I'm curious about some of the origins of IPAC, when it was formed, why, what were some of the the rationale in the beginning, how it came to be what it is today.
Our founding CEO is actually, coordinator is actually outside. You can grab him for more information. So from what I can remember, I hope he doesn't hear me. And, or my colleague here can happily answer. We were founded in 2020 for June 4th. At least I know that. I'm sorry.
Hi, yeah, I'm Andrew, Secretariat Manager at IPAC. Thanks, Chung Ching. So IPAC was founded very much in response to the national security law in Hong Kong and the increasing evidence coming out of the Uyghur region of human rights abuses there. So its foundational principles are upholding human rights, safeguarding the international rules-based order, and strengthening democracies internationally. So to answer an earlier question I think you asked about why and how members come into IPAC, they are driven by those core beliefs around human rights, upholding the international rules-based order, and strengthening democracies. I think what we've seen over the last 2 years is moving not just from the Uyghur and Hong Kong issues, but also to strengthening democracy in Taiwan, and also, as the subject of this conference has been, addressing the threats that the Chinese government and the United Front work poses to our own democracies at home.
Sorry, is it very still Brit? I mean, you all have British accents, so I'm assuming.
Me?
I mean,
Or him.
well,
I'm very happy. That's a compliment. I've been practicing very hard for a British accent.
Oh, okay. You have to. Sounds like you have to fit in. Yeah, I'm just wondering how British this organisation is, and you're very global, obviously globally focused. But it's interesting for me as a
Would our
dual citizen.
coordinator want to respond to that question? We have Brits members, as you can hear from not mine but their accent. I'm practicing very hard to pretend to be one. I'm originally from Hong Kong. I'm born and raised in Hong Kong, and I'm currently living in exile. And we have members in Japan, in Australia, in Brussels. So we have diversity. Yeah, we have diversity and gender balance, so to say.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. And I'm just curious to know, it's very important to have international community support for Hong Kongers and all the community that are facing persecution and all these things. So being a Tibetan, from our own experience, and my parents and grandparents, they never thought that we will be in exile for this so long. They thought that we will go back to Tibet in another maximum 5 to 10 years. But we are in exile for 60 more years. So I just want to know, apart from getting support from international community, how Hong Kongers in exile are organizing yourself within, if at worst scenario, the situation is not resolved soon.
First of all, I'm sorry for what you're going through. I can't say that I understand, but I'm starting to kind of understand the pain of being in exile. The question how Hong Kongers are preparing and gathering international support. I think first of all to prepare, I don't think there's any way to prepare for exile because it hit us quite unexpectedly. But there is a lot of, as I said, like when the slide about what we're doing, like there is a lot of, there is a lot of cultural preservation going on. For example, the language that we speak, Cantonese, is such a rich language. But after a lot of us have moved out of Hong Kong, will our kids or the next generation of Hong Kongers, will they be able to speak the language? Will they understand the root of our culture? I think it has been a focus of the diaspora movement, trying to preserve their culture. And at the same time, because a lot of things can no longer happen in Hong Kong, like films cannot be made, artwork cannot be created freely. And so there are a lot of efforts to trying to bring those things to the diaspora community to continue to work on those things. And also there is a very nice trend of people forming small communities and local communities trying to help each other, to stick with each other and to do like different activities like playing tennis together or just having dinner once in a while. I think those are all the small things that Hong Kongers are doing to prepare for being in exile for longer times. I think a lot of us know that we won't be able to return to Hong Kong in a way, but we, like the diaspora movement, is still fighting to be able to go back, knowing that the hope is kind of dim in that sense. And to gather international support, I think the case of Hong Kong and Tibet cannot be directly compared, for sure, because it's a very, very different context. For example, we don't have a religious leader, we don't already have a political figure before we go into exile. So we are quite scattered and decentralized in so many ways. And we don't have one like very big community of Hong Kongers as the Tibetans have in India or in other places. We are scattered into different continents, wherever governments are willing to take us. So it's a bit different, but there are a lot of groups. For example, there are colleagues, as you have heard from Anouk, Ray, Iverson, they're all doing policy advocacy work. And myself is working in IPAC on policy advocacy. And there are groups working on cultural preservation, like Nathan Law's Umbrella Community. And he organized a film festival playing Hong Kong films that are no longer allowed in Hong Kong. And there are groups like, I think that colleague is here as well, Simon Chang. He organized a group called Hong Kongers in Britain, trying to help provide support for those asylum seekers or people moving to the UK recently. And there are similar efforts in the US, or even self-organized effort to do that, like offering a bed, a room for someone who's in need. So these are the things that we're doing. So awareness raising within our own community, trying to take ownership of a civic entitlements, and also reaching out to politicians and governments to say, you have to care about this. The case for UK is a bit special because we were a former colony of the UK. So the UK have a responsibility for Hong Kong because of the Sino-British Joint Declaration. See, this is what I said, we have to start from 1997 all the time. So this is the responsibility that I have. But for other governments, there are other approach that needs to be used when you're trying to persuade them that you need to focus on Hong Kong, you need to understand Hong Kong. And it varies from different topics. For example, there is a Russian yacht that was in Hong Kong after the sanctions was issued on Russia. And so there are discussions about if Hong Kong is serving as a foreign fund channel for Russia and so on and so forth. So these are some of the things that we can talk about when it comes to drawing attention. So these are the strategies that I observe from the Hong Kong community in that way. I think we have 2 more minutes. If there is no more question, I think we will have the... Oh. Good? Yeah, so thank you very much. And we will have a last keynote speaker from an MEP who is our IPAC co-chair. So if you have more questions about IPAC, feel free to ask him.